The air in the guard tower known as Spire 4 was a thick cocktail of stale sweat, grit, and the faint, acrid tang of heated electronics. It was a taste, a smell, a texture that clung to the back of the throat. The permanent atmosphere of forward operating base Dagger. Outside, the Afghan sun hammered down on the HESCO barriers and the razor wire, bleaching the world into shades of beige and gray. Inside, the gloom was a welcome, if suffocating, respite. The tower was a steel box on stilts, a tiny kingdom overlooking a vast, hostile sea of sand and rock. And its king, for all intents and purposes, was Marine Gunnery Sergeant Gunner Davies. Davies was a man carved from the very granite of institutional tradition. His jaw was square. His haircut was a high and tight masterpiece of geometric precision, and his uniform, even in this dust-choked hellhole, looked as if it had been starched and pressed by a drill instructor's ghost. He moved with an economy of motion that bespoke years of close-order drill, a rigid posture that seemed to defy the oppressive gravity of the place. Authority did not just cling to him. It radiated from his pores like heat from a furnace, a product of his rank, his size, and a voice that could strip paint from a bulkhead at 20 paces. He was the lord of this small, vital fiefdom, and his word was law, his presence the unblinking eye of discipline on the wire. It was this absolute, self-assured authority that was so profoundly offended by the presence of the woman. She was an anomaly, a disruption to the natural order of things. Her name, he'd heard, was Alara Vance, a civilian logistics analyst attached to the base command. To Davies, that title was just a string of meaningless syllables. What he saw was a small, quiet woman in nondescript khaki pants and a plain gray shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple, unadorned ponytail. She did not belong here. Not in his tower. She stood near the heart of his kingdom, the altar of his faith, the Browning M 2.50 caliber machine gun. The Ma Deuce. It sat on its tripod mount like a sleeping iron god, its long, heavy barrel pointed out at the simmering landscape. It was a weapon of profound, earth-shaking power, a symbol of everything Davies believed in. Brute force, overwhelming firepower, the final argument of a superpower. Vance was not looking at the gun. Her focus was on a small, ruggedized tablet in her hand, its screen displaying a complex schematic of overlapping sensor fields. She was checking the integration of new thermal imagers with the tower's existing acoustic detection system. Her movements were minimal, her expression a mask of placid concentration. She seemed utterly oblivious to the sacred ground on which she stood, oblivious to the simmering resentment of the tower's king. She was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of data in a world of brass and gunpowder. This anonymity, this quiet self-containment, was what infuriated Davies the most. It was as if he and his entire world were of no consequence to her. He had watched her for 5 minutes, his irritation mounting with each passing second. She had arrived without so much as a "by your leave," nodding curtly to the junior Marine on watch before setting up her small electronic domain. The young Lance Corporal, intimidated by Davies's mere presence, had shrunk into the corner, leaving the confrontation to his superior. Davies cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. She did not look up. He took a step closer, the steel plates of his boots clanging on the metal deck. The sound was meant to command attention. It failed. Finally, he spoke, his voice dripping with the condescending patience one might use on a particularly dim-witted child. "Ma'am, this is a restricted combat position. I'm going to have to ask you to take your paperwork somewhere else." He gestured vaguely at her tablet, the word paperwork loaded with dismissive contempt. Vance finished tracing a line on the screen with her finger. Only then did she look up. Her eyes were a pale, indeterminate color, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. They held no deference, no intimidation, no emotion at all. It was like being looked at by a camera. "My work requires me to be here, Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice soft but clear, devoid of inflection. "I'm verifying the sensor fusion for the new Talos integration. Your tower is the final node." The jargon was a minor annoyance, a smokescreen of technical nonsense. He didn't care about a Talos integration. He cared about the sanctity of his post. "I don't care if you're installing a coffee maker. This is an active defensive position, not an office. You're a distraction. Pack it up." He pointed toward the ladder. She did not move. Her gaze drifted from his face to the M2 beside her, then back. "My work order is signed by the base commander. I have a 3-hour window. I've used 20 minutes of it. I will be done in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Her response was not argumentative. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same dispassionate finality as a weather report. This was the core of the insult. She was not engaging with his authority. She was simply noting it as an irrelevant variable in her own, more important equation. It was the calm of a lioness allowing a jackal to dance and bark at the edge of its kill radius, knowing that the jackal's display was meaningless. The comparison sparked in Davies's mind and fanned the embers of his anger into a flame. "I am the senior NCO on this section of the line, ma'am," he said, stepping directly into her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. The tactic, a classic tool of physical intimidation, had worked on 1,000 young Marines. "The base commander isn't up here breathing this dust. I am, and I am giving you a direct order. Leave. Now." She did not flinch. She did not step back. She simply held his gaze, her own unnervingly placid. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the electronics and the distant, mournful cry of the wind whipping around the tower. The young lance corporal in the corner looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Your order contradicts my own, which originates from a higher command authority," she stated, as if explaining a basic principle of physics. "In such a case, protocol dictates I continue my assigned task until your command is verified or a superseding order is issued." The sheer clinical audacity of it stole his breath. She was quoting regulations at him. Him, Gunnery Sergeant Davies. He felt a flush of hot blood rise up his neck, his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. He saw her as the embodiment of everything he despised about the modern, corporate military. Civilian contractors with inflated salaries and no concept of the chain of command. No respect for the unwritten rules of the tribe. He reached out, not to strike her, but to assert his will through physical action. He jabbed a thick finger at her tablet. "This is over." Then his hand moved to the side, brushing against the cold steel of the M2's receiver. "And you will not touch my weapon." The possessive pronoun was the key. It was his gun, his tower, his world. In that moment, she did something that completely broke the script. She reached out with one hand and laid it flat on the M2's receiver, next to his. Her touch was light, almost a caress. It was an act of quiet, defiant ownership. "It's not your weapon, Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "It is a United States government asset, just like you, and just like me. Right now, I'm ensuring its targeting systems are functioning. A task, I might add, that is critical to its effective use. which makes it, for the moment, my responsibility. That was it. The final line had been crossed. The condescension, the defiance, the gall of this pencil pusher. He felt his discipline snap. He grabbed her arm, his fingers wrapping around her slender forearm with bruising force. The intent was to physically pull her away, to drag her from the tower if necessary. "You're done," he snarled, his face inches from hers, and then the world stopped. It wasn't a conscious act of observation. It was a sudden, violent reordering of his entire universe. As his fingers tightened, her sleeve, which had been resting at her wrist, slid back an inch. Just an inch. But it was enough. There, on the pale skin of her inner forearm, was a tattoo. It was small, no bigger than a quarter, and rendered in stark, black ink. It wasn't a skull or a flag or any of the common military symbology he was used to seeing. It was something strange, something alien. A circle, bisected by a single, perfectly straight vertical line, with 3 smaller horizontal lines crossing the vertical one. It looked like some kind of esoteric symbol or a stylized scope reticle from a piece of equipment he had never seen. But Davies had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps. He had done 2 tours with a fast company, served alongside recon, and had even done a brief stint as a liaison with MARSOC. He had been in rooms where whispers were traded like currency, stories of men who did not officially exist, who operated in the deepest, darkest shadows of clandestine warfare. He had heard a story once, from a grizzled master sergeant in a dimly lit bar in Okinawa, about a legendary sniper from a joint task force, a ghost who had a call sign but no name, a legend credited with an impossible shot in the Hindu Kush. The master sergeant had been drunk, and he'd drawn a symbol on a napkin with a pen, a symbol he said was only known to the true believers, a symbol that meant you were in the presence of royalty. It was the symbol now burned into the skin of the woman whose arm he held. Gunnery Sergeant Davies froze. His mind, which seconds before had been a storm of righteous fury, became a dead, silent vacuum. The certainties that had structured his entire life, rank, uniform, gender, presence, crumbled into dust. The hand that had been a vise of iron went slack. His fingers uncurled as if he had touched a live wire. The world tilted on its axis. He was not looking at a logistics analyst. He was looking at a myth. He was holding the arm of a ghost. And in that moment of frozen, terrifying revelation, the world outside the tower exploded. The first mortar round landed 50 meters from the base of the tower with a deafening crump that vibrated through the steel deck plating. It was not a random shot. It was a precise bracketing round. The second followed a heartbeat later, landing on the other side. The sirens on the FOB erupted in a panicked, unified wail. The war, which had been a simmering, abstract threat on the horizon, had just arrived at their doorstep with sudden, catastrophic violence. "Contact! Contact! Mortars on the wire!" The shout came from the young lance corporal, his voice cracking with adrenaline and fear. He scrambled for his own rifle, fumbling with the safety. Davies was still frozen, his mind a battlefield of cognitive dissonance. The tattoo, the explosion, the woman, his training screamed at him to act, to take command, to get on the gun. But his brain was locked, trying to reconcile the impossible reality of the symbol on her arm with the mundane woman he had been berating. He was a statue of a gunnery sergeant, a perfect replica of a leader, but hollowed out from the inside. The third mortar round was a direct hit on the adjacent tower, Spire 3. A blossom of fire and black smoke erupted, and the sickening sound of twisted metal followed. The chatter on the radio exploded into a cacophony of panicked voices. Reports of probing attacks on the south gate, the crackle of small arms fire joining the percussive rhythm of the mortars. It was a coordinated, complex attack. Professional. Vance had not moved. She hadn't even flinched at the first explosion. While Davies was locked in his mental paralysis, she was a study in absolute stillness. Then, as the third round hit, she moved. It was not a panicked scramble. It was a shift, a fluid and economical unfolding of motion, like a predator uncoiling from a state of rest. Her body, which had seemed small and unassuming, now appeared dense, coiled with a terrifying potential energy. She took one step to the M2. Her hand, the one he had just released, closed around the spade grips. Her other hand went to the charging handle. She pulled it back with a smooth, practiced motion, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding home a definitive metallic punctuation mark in the chaos. "I'll get on the net," she said. Her voice had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by a clipped, resonant authority that cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. It was not a request. It was a command. "Tell Command Spire 4 is operational, and get me a spotter." Davies blinked. The order, so crisp and clear, rebooted his brain. He stumbled to the radio handset, his movements clumsy and robotic. Who are you?" he stammered, the question a desperate plea for understanding. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were already scanning the battlefield outside. Her head tilted slightly, seeming to taste the wind. "I'm the one on the gun. That's all you need to know right now, Gunny." The use of the shortened rank was not familiar. It was dismissive. It placed him firmly in a subordinate role. "Now get on the net before we're all dead." He fumbled the handset to his mouth. "All stations, this is Spire 4. We are operational." He paused, looking at the woman now seated behind the weapon, as if she were born there. "We have eyes on the mortar team." And indeed, she did. Her gaze was fixed on a rocky outcropping nearly 1,000 meters out, a place that looked like 1,000 other identical pieces of rock. But her eyes, sharper than the high-powered optics mounted on the gun, had seen the flicker of movement, the puff of dust that preceded the last launch. "Lance Corporal," she said, her voice never rising. The young Marine, who had been trying to make himself smaller in the corner, straightened up as if zapped with a cattle prod. "You have binos?" "Yes, ma'am," he squeaked. Good. Put them on that ridge. Azimuth 290. Look for a cluster of 3 boulders. Tell me what you see." The Lance Corporal scrambled to obey, his hands shaking as he raised the binoculars. I see rocks, ma'am." "Look closer," she commanded. "Behind the middle boulder, there's a depression. You're looking for a mortar tube and a 3-man team." While he squinted, she was already at work. Her hands moved over the M2 with an intimacy that was both shocking and beautiful. She wasn't just manning a machine gun, she was communing with it. She checked the headspace and timing with a few deft clicks and turns, a procedure that took most gunners a full minute, in under 5 seconds. Her thumb brushed the rear sight, adjusting for windage and elevation, not by looking at the numbers, but by feel, by instinct. She pulled a single round from the ammo belt, held it up, and seemed to weigh it in her hand. Her eyes half closed. It was a ritual, a silent prayer to the god of ballistics. "I see it!" the Lance Corporal shouted. "Oh my God, I see them! They're reloading!" "Good," Vance said. "That's your only job now. Keep your eyes on them. Call out their movements." She chambered the round and settled into the gun, her body becoming one with the machine. Her shoulders, her arms, her breathing, it all synced into a single, stable firing platform. Davies watched, mesmerized. He was a qualified expert on the M2. He knew what it took to operate it effectively. It was a beast, an area denial weapon. You walked the rounds onto a target, you suppressed, you sprayed. You did not, under any circumstances, treat it like a rifle. Vance was treating it like a rifle, a sniper rifle. The first shot was not a burst. It was a single, deliberate press of the trigger, a solitary, thunderous boom that was utterly different from the chattering roar he was used to. The massive .50 caliber round tore through the air with a sound like ripping canvas. 1,000 meters away, a geyser of rock and dust erupted from the face of the boulder, inches from the enemy position. It was a ranging shot, a perfect, terrifying ranging shot. "Wind is 5 miles per hour, full value from the west," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Up 2 clicks. Her thumb moved the sight again. "They're scattering!" the lance corporal yelled, his voice a mix of terror and awe. "One of them is running." "He's not running. He's relocating. He's their spotter," Vance corrected him, her voice a flat, clinical monotone. She adjusted her point of aim, leading the running figure by a fractional amount. Another single, deafening shot. This time, there was no geyser of dust. 1,000 meters away, the running figure simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, a frantic silhouette against the beige rock. The next, he was gone, replaced by a brief pink mist that the wind snatched away instantly. A profound silence fell inside the tower. The lance corporal lowered his binoculars, his mouth hanging open. Davies felt a cold dread mix with a sense of reverent awe. No one made that shot. Not with a 20-year-old machine gun, firing ball ammunition at a moving target a kilometer away. It wasn't just impossible. It was a violation of the laws of physics. "2 left," Vance stated, her eye still pressed to the sight. "They're trying to get the tube under cover." She shifted the gun back to the original position. She did not fire a burst. She fired 2 more single shots, so close together they sounded like a single, stuttering boom. Boom, boom. Out on the ridge, the world dissolved into fire and shrapnel. One of the rounds had clearly impacted the mortar tube itself. The other must have hit the pile of high-explosive shells next to it. The secondary explosion was massive, a rolling ball of orange and black that momentarily eclipsed the sun. The mortar position was gone. The threat was neutralized. In the sudden quiet, as the echoes of the explosion rolled back across the valley, a new voice cut through the radio static. It was calm, steady, and carried the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority. It was a voice that made colonels straighten their ties. "All stations, this is Sea Dragon 6, the voice said, using the call sign for the commander of all special operations forces in the theater. "Who is on the gun in Spire 4? Over." Davies, still holding the handset like a holy relic, was incapable of speech. He looked at Vance. She was methodically clearing the M2, her movements now slow and deliberate, the crisis over. She seemed completely unfazed. "Spire 4, this is Sea Dragon 6, I say again. Give me the name of your gunner." That was a 1-in-a-million shot string. "I want that shooter's name now." Vance looked at Davies. She simply nodded. Permission granted. Davies swallowed, his throat dry as dust. "Sea Dragon 6, this is Gunnery Sergeant Davies in Spire 4. The shooter is a civilian analyst, sir. Her name is Alara Vance." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched for an eternity. Davies could picture the legendary Sergeant Major on the other end, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then, the voice came back, but it had changed. The command tone was gone, replaced by something else. Disbelief. And then, dawning comprehension. "Did you say Vance? First name Alara?" The voice was quieter now, almost personal. "Affirmative, Sea Dragon 6, Davies mumbled. Another pause. Then a chuckle, a low, incredulous, and deeply respectful chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. The ghost of Gardez. We thought you were a myth." The radio clicked off, then on again, this time broadcasting across the entire base command net. All stations, cease all non-essential traffic. Stand by." The wail of the sirens died down. The chatter of small arms fire faded as the remnants of the probing attack melted back into the hills. A strange, expectant quiet fell over FOB Dagger. From his perch in the tower, Davies could see figures emerging from bunkers, from command tents, from fighting positions, all looking around in confusion. Then, the voice of Sea Dragon 6, Master Gunnery Sergeant Callahan, a man who was himself a living legend in the MARSOC community, boomed across every radio on the base. It was not a request. It was a bellow of pure, unadulterated command. "Attention on deck!" Instinct, drilled into him over 2 decades, took over. Davies snapped his body into the rigid, unmoving posture of attention. His back went ramrod straight, his chin tucked, his hands flattened at his sides. The young lance corporal, wide-eyed, did the same. Across the entire FOB, from the main gate to the airfield, hundreds of Marines, soldiers, and airmen froze and snapped to the position of attention. They didn't know why. They only knew that a voice like God had commanded it. A few minutes later, 2 figures appeared at the base of Spire 4's ladder. One was Master Gunnery Sergeant Callahan himself, his face a mask of hardened leather and grim respect. The other was the base commander, a full bird colonel who looked flustered and confused. Callahan climbed the ladder with the agility of a man half his age. When his head cleared the floor of the tower, his eyes found Vance. She was standing now, wiping her hands on a rag, the picture of quiet composure. Callahan did not speak. He took 2 more steps, planted his feet, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute Davies had ever seen. It was not the perfunctory gesture offered to an officer. It was an act of pure, unadulterated reverence. A knight kneeling before his queen. "Ma'am," Callahan said, his voice thick with emotion, "it is an honor, an absolute honor." The base commander, who had just reached the top of the ladder, saw the most feared enlisted man in the entire theater saluting a civilian logistics analyst. His jaw went slack. "Master Gunny? What in the hell is going on?" Callahan did not break his salute. "Sir, with all due respect, you are in the presence of Chief Warrant Officer 5 Alara Vance, call sign Valkyrie, the senior tactical expert for the Joint Special Operations Command's Asymmetric Warfare Group. She is not attached to your command. She is here to evaluate your command, and she just saved this entire FOB." The name descended into the small tower like a tactical nuclear weapon. Chief Warrant Officer 5, the unicorn rank, a mythical creature of unparalleled technical and tactical expertise, a direct advisor to generals, a figure who operated so far outside the conventional chain of command that they answered to almost no one. They were the keepers of the flame, the living repositories of institutional knowledge. And this one, this quiet, unassuming woman, was a legend even among them. The ghost of Gardez, the Valkyrie. Davies felt his knees go weak. The tattoo wasn't just a symbol of an elite unit. It was the personal sigil of a warrior queen. Vance finally looked at Callahan. She returned his salute with a short, crisp nod. "Thank you for the backup, Master Gunny. Things were getting a little loud." She then turned her gaze to the base commander. "Colonel, your perimeter's response time was 37 seconds outside of acceptable parameters. Your command net discipline under fire is non-existent, and one of your senior NCOs attempted to remove a mission-critical asset from an active engagement based on personal prejudice." Her gaze shifted slowly, inexorably, until it landed on Gunnery Sergeant Davies. The weight of that gaze was a physical force. It crushed him. It stripped away his rank, his pride, his 22 years of service, and left him naked and ashamed. He had not just been wrong, he had been a fool. A dangerous, arrogant fool whose pride had almost cost the lives of his men. His worldview, built on a foundation of rigid certainty, had been pulverized into fine, worthless sand. "Gunnery Sergeant Davies," she said, her voice now back to its clinical, dispassionate tone. "Your actions constituted a catastrophic failure in tactical judgment. Your prejudices blinded you to a battlefield asset. Your ego superseded your duty. Under Article 91 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I could have you formally charged with insubordination and dereliction of duty in a combat zone. The resulting court-martial would end your career." Davies did not speak. He could not. He simply stood there, receiving the judgment he so richly deserved. He braced for the end, for the public disgrace, the stripping of his rank, the ignominious flight home. But the sentence, when it came, was far worse. "However," Vance continued, "a court-martial would be a waste of resources. You are a symptom of a cultural disease, not the disease itself. Punishment is inefficient. Education is permanent. Therefore, effective immediately, you are reassigned." The colonel sputtered. "Reassigned? Ma'am, I don't think—" "He is reassigned to my personal staff for the remainder of my deployment here," Vance stated, cutting him off without a glance. "His new duty title is Special Projects NCO. His primary function will be the maintenance and calibration of my personal weapon systems and sensor equipment. He will be my armor-bearer. He will learn the difference between perceived authority and actual competence. He will learn that respect is a currency earned through action, not a tribute demanded by rank. He will learn to see the weapon, not the hand that holds it." She looked back at Davies, her gray eyes boring into his soul. "Is that understood, Gunnery Sergeant?" He found his voice, a raw, broken whisper. "Yes, ma'am." The weeks that followed were the most profoundly humbling period of Gunner Davies's life. He was, as she had promised, her armor-bearer. He cleaned the M2 from Spire 4 with a religious devotion, but he also cleaned her personal rifle, a heavily modified SR-25 that was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. He inventoried her equipment, a dazzling and terrifying array of technology he didn't even know existed. He sat in on her debriefs with generals, a silent, invisible presence in the corner of the room, listening as she calmly and methodically deconstructed weeks of strategy with a few perfectly chosen words. She never raised her voice to him. She never humiliated him again. Her method of instruction was far more potent. It was proximity. She forced him to exist in her orbit, to witness firsthand the chasm that separated his own loud, brittle confidence from her quiet, unshakable competence. He learned that her small, unassuming stature was a weapon in itself, a form of camouflage that allowed her to observe, assess, and act before anyone even registered her as a threat. He learned that her minimalist speech was a function of supreme efficiency. She did not waste a single word, just as she did not waste a single motion or a single bullet. He watched her teach young snipers not just how to shoot, but how to think, how to see the world as a complex equation of wind, gravity, and human behavior. He was being reforged in the fire of her excellence. The arrogance was burned away, layer by layer, replaced by a quiet, profound respect that bordered on worship. The man who had entered Spire 4 that day died, and a new man was slowly, painfully being born. 10 years later, the story of the civilian analyst in Spire 4 had become a modern military fable, a piece of institutional lore told to new lieutenants and cocky sergeants to instill a measure of humility. The details grew with each telling: the number of enemies, the distance of the shot, the ferocity of the attack. But the core truth of it remained: a polished stone of essential wisdom. In a classroom at the Staff Non-Commissioned Officer Academy at Quantico, a new generation of Marine sergeants sat listening to their instructor. He was a master sergeant now, a man with gray at his temples and a quiet authority that was nothing like the blustering dominance of his youth. His name was Gunner Davies. He was widely regarded as one of the finest instructors the Academy had ever seen, a man who taught not just tactics, but wisdom. "We have a saying," Master Sergeant Davies said, his voice calm and measured, filling the quiet room. "Let your actions be your argument. We teach you to be loud, to be forceful, to project authority, and those are valuable tools, but they are not the source of authority. They are the packaging, the substance. The substance is competence." He paused, and his eyes scanned the faces of the young, eager NCOs before him. He saw himself in them. He saw the same unearned confidence, the same belief in the superficial markers of power. "I'm going to tell you a story," he said. "About a day I met a true master of our profession. I didn't recognize her because I was a fool. I was blinded by my own ego, by my own assumptions about what a warrior looked like. I saw a small woman in civilian clothes, and I dismissed her. I saw a threat to my authority where I should have seen a guardian angel. That mistaken judgment almost cost good Marines their lives." He walked to a projector and put up an image on the screen. It was a simple, stark, black drawing, a circle bisected by a vertical line, crossed by 3 horizontal hash marks. "This symbol," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If you ever see this symbol on a piece of gear, on a vehicle, or tattooed on a person's skin, you are in the presence of the highest level of expertise our military can produce. You will shut your mouth, you will open your ears, and you will thank God that they are on your side. You will not question them. You will not challenge them. You will learn from them." He turned back to the class, his expression one of profound, hard-won sincerity. "The most dangerous person in any room is almost never the loudest. It's not the one with the most decorations on their chest or the most stripes on their sleeve. It is the quiet professional, the one who watches and listens and thinks. The one whose competence is so absolute that they have no need to advertise it. Your job as leaders is not just to command, it is to recognize that competence in whatever form it takes. In a man, in a woman, in a private, in a general, in a civilian. To fail in that duty is the greatest failure of a leader." He let the lesson hang in the air, a final, definitive statement. True strength is not the power to dominate, it is the wisdom to serve a higher purpose. True authority is not seized, it is granted by those who recognize your worth. He had learned that lesson at the feet of a master, in a dusty tower overlooking a valley of death. He had been humbled, broken, and remade. And in his transformation, the legend of Chief Warrant Officer 5 Ilara Vance, the ghost of Gardez, achieved its true purpose. It did not just create a fable, it forged better leaders, ensuring the core of her lesson, competence over credentials, substance over style, would echo down the generations, long after the sound of her impossible shots had faded from memory.